Hi there, Jan here again, and here I am with part 2 of my pagan journey. Sorry, I'm just getting comfy. I can't reach the camera from here to get comfy first and then start filming, so I have to start filming and then get comfy. And as I say, this is part 2. If you're interested, you can go back on my videos and find part 1, but when I did part 1 I hadn't written any notes down at all. I was just talking off the top of my head, and I realised afterwards there's so many things that I'd like to share with you, but it kind of, your memory just sort of mixes things up over the years, so to get it in any kind of chronological order I had to write down notes and try and use notes. But I'm not going to read my notes because when I've tried to read a script in the past, I've ended up deleting the whole video because it just doesn't work. It comes across very, very false, and I prefer to just talk to you in a far more natural sense. But this is actually take 2. Echo came along and knocked into the tripod, and he had a big wobble. So I've got my notes. It's probably a good idea if I put a timer on again so that I know when that's it, so I know when time's running out. Except for, oh dear, I need to completely reset the timer. Do bear with. That's better. And we're off. I'm so sorry about that. I try to get myself all organised and it just doesn't work. But anyway, as I was saying, I've got my notes, and having put things into chronological order, we need to go back just slightly to before the end of the last video. So I haven't yet met Neil at this stage. I'm out, I'm practicing paganism quite openly. I've met up with a large group of pagans in the area, but they're following all kinds of different traditions. You've got witches, you've got druids, you've got shamanic paths, you've got the Nordic paths, all sorts of different traditions. But we're all kind of coming together and doing rituals together at full moons and things, sharing a little bit from each of our pathways. So it kind of depended on who's organising it as to, just adjusting the camera slightly there, sorry, as to kind of which flavour the ritual that we're doing that particular time had. But it was a lovely time, you know, lovely group of people working together in a really nice way. And there was one lady in the group who was following a North American Indian shamanic kind of pathway, and she used to do sweat lodges. So she did a lodge for the group of us. I've got the tripod leg where my foot wants to go, and so I found myself going over to her house. She lived the other side of town, had a lovely house with a big garden, and we were going to do the lodge in her garden. So we fast all day before the lodge because you don't want to be going into that kind of situation with a full stomach, or you could end up being quite ill. So we're fasting all day, and we go over in the afternoon to help prepare the whole thing. You know, there's a fire pit dug, there's a fire laid, the stones that we're going to use are put to the fire, so they're going to be heated up. We measure out the size of the circle exactly, or the size of the lodge exactly to fit the amount of people that were going to be going in. And I honestly don't remember exactly who was there that time, but there's probably 6 or 8 of us in total. And as I say, it was measured out, and then there were willow branches put across in various different directions, and then as I suppose the traditional way would be to use buffalo hide or whatever, but in our case it was blankets and tarpaulins. I think we were fresh out of buffalo hide. but these were all put across, and then there was a circle in the very centre where the hot stones were going to be put, and there was just enough room, kind of shoulder to shoulder all the way around, and you had to have your knees pulled in really tight, otherwise your feet would end up burning on the stones. So it was very cramped and incredibly uncomfortable. But having said that, sometimes you kind of need to suffer a little bit in order to get where you need to go, spiritually, if you know what I mean. And the fire was lit and the stones were heated, and we were all smudged and welcomed into the lodge and took our places around. I seem to remember that I was halfway round, so I'm opposite the door where we came in, so a few people had come in before me and walked and moved around, and we're all sort of shuffling around into position, and eventually everybody's in and the bricks are brought in and the flap over the doors closed, and we begin the prayer rounds. And as I remember, and as I say, this is 30 odd years ago, it's a long time ago, so we're working on old memories here. We were doing prayer rounds, so it would have been on certain themes, so things that we're grateful for, or things that we want to bring into our lives, or whatever. You may know far more about how this is done than I can remember 30 years on. But each time we would go round each individual person, who would then offer their thanks or ask for what they wanted and sort of bring things into their life. And then as you get back to the opening where the door was, as it came to that person, then we'd go outside and have 5 minutes outside, then we'd all come back in again, fresh stones brought in, and each time it felt hotter than the last time. It was just so hot in there. And I think there was probably, I don't know if I'm just confusing it with the sauna, but I have a memory of it being quite steamy in there, so maybe water was put on the stones. In all honesty, I don't really know. I just remember that we were doing the rounds, going outside, going back inside for the next prayer round, for whatever. There was a theme to each round, but I can't remember what the themes were. And so we had these prayer rounds, and then at the end it was so incredibly hot, but I remember coming out, and we were using her garden hose to hose each other off, and I remember just laying in the grass stark naked, just looking up at the clearest sky, the most amazing sky, and watching what I think must have been the Hale-Bopp comet go across the sky. And it was just so magical just to be just gently cooling down after this incredibly, literally heated experience in the lodge. And just laying in this cool grass, slightly damp. It was just wonderful. And then we went in the house and we had quite literally a breakfast feast inside. We'd all brought food to share, so we then had something to eat, and then later on went home. So that was a lovely experience of a sweat lodge. I only ever did 2 of them. I think by the second one, I'd met Neil, and he came to that lodge, and that's another story entirely. But so that's the lodge. And I'd started working with a few within the wider group who were practicing witchcraft, and it must have been around the same time, because one night there's only about 5 of us, not a coven but a group that were working together and practicing witchcraft, and we'd decided to go over to the local park, but that meant parking on one side of the road and going over a footbridge into the park, because the car park for the park was closed at night. So we had to park, walk over the bridge, disappear into the woodland, to a special place that I've been using for decades in the forest, where we had a wonderful ritual. It may have been a full moon. I don't recall it being working for anything in particular. I think it must have been a full moon. But what I do remember about that one is coming back, because we'd all got changed, so we were wearing robes and cloaks and things. And as we got back to the cars, I can't remember, I think it was 2 cars we had then with us that night, or we may have all squashed into one car. But somehow the keys had got locked into the car. And next thing we knew, another car had pulled up next to us, and it's the police, wondering why this strange group of people, all dressed weirdly, are trying to break into a car. And, you know, we said, well, we've been over in the park. And it's like, well, what have you been doing in the park? And then one of the guys just piped up, oh, we went to watch the comet. So it must have been the same sort of time. And I remember looking at this policeman who just had this look on his face, and there was another one in the car just kind of sniggering. And I remember thinking, I bet they can't wait to get back to the station and say, well, you never guess what we just seen. But we did eventually get back into the cars and get home safely. And 2 of the people that were in that group were the couple who I was talking about in the last video about doing the hand fasting for, but that came much, much later. But another lady within the group that we were working with locally had been working with a coven, and she invited me to go along. There was a meeting of 3 covens, I think it was, that were going to come together and do a big ritual, and I had been invited to go along, which was lovely. But there's normally, if you're using a farmer's field or something, then you would give the farmer some money, and so that there would be a cost to doing it, plus the cost of getting there. And I remember it was something to do with, you know, I couldn't afford to drive down there, or I put all these reasons in the way why I couldn't go. And the next thing I knew, it was a case of, no, you are coming. We're not going to charge you anything to come. We will pick you up from your house and we will bring you home afterwards. You just need to bring your robes and a tent, because it's going to be an overnight stay. It's in Devon, so it's quite a drive. So all excuses that I had to not go were removed from me, and it was a case of, yes, we would be driving down to Devon. So on the allotted day, the car pulls up outside and I go out, and I have to say it was the worst drive I think I've ever had in my life. There was the couple who were driving sat in the front seat. The boot or trunk of their car was taken up with all their tent and all their things. So my friend and I from Crawley were both sat on the back seat. It was quite a small car. We ended up having to sit on our bedding with tents on our laps, our heads on the roof of the car, literally shoulder to shoulder and the other shoulder on the window. It was just absolutely packed in like sardines. And this is a 4-hour drive, you know, to get to where we're going. And but we eventually get there. And then the couple in the front were saying that I think it was the wife who said that she wanted to stop and get a cup of tea before we actually got to the final destination. And so there was a discussion about what would happen about that, and because I think the guy had wanted to go directly there because we had to get there before dark because we needed to pitch tents and sort all ourselves out and everything. But we did eventually have a cup of tea, and I think it was in Honiton. But then when we got back in the car, it was at least another half hour from stopping for that cup of tea in town to where we were going, and I hadn't got a clue where we were when we ended up. I had no idea then, I've got no idea now exactly where it was, other than it was maybe half an hour's drive from Honiton. And we end up getting to this field, there are some introductions, so I'm meeting people, but then it's a case of you've got to get your tents up, you know, we've got to be all ready to go by nightfall. And so it's putting tents up, blowing up an airbed, because I didn't have a pump for mine, so I was just puffing it up and trying to get everything ready. There was a huge bonfire to the side of where we were going to have a ritual. A massive, great big bonfire. An altar had been set up with what I have to say to this day, I have never seen a better goddess statue than the ones that they had there on that day. And then the bonfire is lit, and it's this amazing bonfire, and then we all start to take place within the circle. And this is my first time that I've actually worked with a proper coven. I felt very kind of new and inexperienced. But it was a case of they had invited me, they wanted me. I'm just going to have to go with the flow and hope that I don't put a foot out of place, that it's all going to work out right. And, you know, I had read certain things about how rituals are performed in books, but there again, that only describes those rituals, and if you're a slightly different tradition, they might do it a different way, but it was all going to be fine. And just as the ritual was about to start, before the circle was actually cast, from the other side of the field came a guy dressed pretty much all in white, incredibly tall, and with like a Tibetan waistcoat and hat on, and he came over and actually stood next to me in circle. And then the rituals performed, the circles cast, the quarters are called, everything that needs to be done is done. And then we have a sharing of wine and bread. It's not a parody of the Christian one, it is something that we do for our own reasons. And when the wine came round, I held the glass and I put it to my lips. Now you have to remember, I am teetotal. I don't drink at all because I just don't like alcohol, so I'm not used to the taste of wine. But I remember putting it to my lips and it was kind of warm and sticky, and by this time I'm kind of heightened adrenaline and a bit nervous, and just for a fleeting second it went through my mind all those news of the world stories that I'd read years and years ago, and it did just fleetingly think, you know, is this wine or is this blood? But then I actually realised it was warm because the wine had been next to the fire. And wine perhaps just is a bit sticky, I don't know. But having calmed myself down and realised that there had been no sacrifices in this ritual at all, there had been not a sign of a chicken or animals of any description, and I had been with these people throughout this ritual, there was nothing that had happened that was in any way against my morals. And so that thought was put to a side and never thought again. But eventually the circle was closed and taken down, and we all sat around the bonfire and we were chatting, and food was shared, we were eating and drinking, and this tall chap who'd come along in white came and sat next to me. And that evening was the start of a relationship that lasted probably a year, 18 months. And interestingly, that particular relationship had a lot of consequences, shall we say. There were a lot of things that happened sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm looking down at my notes and then thinking, well, how can I explain this? The chap that I'd met was very involved in interfaith and had a lot of, I'm looking for a word now that I can't find, but he mixed with people of all different faiths. He was very involved with any faith, you know, from Christians, Islam, Judaism, pagans, all the different faiths. He had kind of a bit of a thumb in each pie, as it were. So even with my notes, I'm managing to jump ahead of myself. Yeah, so we had this wonderful evening around the bonfire. Again, beautiful starry sky, quite a magical experience in and of itself without the working that we did. But the interesting thing was the following morning, where, like, sort of when you're camping, you're cooking up breakfast and we're all together chatting about the night before and eating and getting to know each other. And then the high priest came across to me and he just handed me a book and said, "Would you like to look at this?" Which I did. I'm very honoured to have been invited to, because the couple, when we were driving home, the book that he'd given me was the Coven Book of Shadows, and on the way home the couple who were driving had said that they had been in that coven for 20 years and never been allowed to touch that book. So why on earth I was given that honour, I don't know. It was something that I do feel to this day very honoured that they would feel comfortable to allow me to look at something that was very precious to that group of people. But anyway, as I say, I get into a relationship with this chap, and through him I started to go along to full moon meditations, and there'd be groups of various different people that would just hold a meditation at the time of the full moon. And I met some really lovely, really, really interesting people, not pagans, but following different paths, different religions, but we would all come together. And it was at one of these evenings that I met a lady who played a symphonic gong, and she had brought her gong along, and we had this meditation with the gong, and it was the most incredible experience. You know, this journey with sound, it was just so fantastic. I'm sorry, that's something going on outside and they're just telling them to stop. So it's this incredible experience, and it was in a house up in North London, and it was a very, very, very hot summer evening, and at the end of the meditation it was so hot, and I'd arranged to actually stay there overnight. I don't think Mr. T, as we'll call him, I don't think he actually stayed with us that night, but I was going to stay overnight, and so it was getting very late, and I said, is there anywhere local that we can just go outside for a walk, a park or something, that we can just go out and have a walk, because it's just so hot, I just want to go out and get some air. And the guy that whose house it was said, well, no, there isn't, there's no parks kind of close by, but if it doesn't bother you, there is a very beautiful graveyard that we could go in and just have a walk. And so we found ourselves wandering through very quietly, very, very respectfully, because it was early hours of the morning by then, but this amazing full moon, walking through this lovely graveyard. And then we went back to the house, stayed overnight, went home the next day. Chester? No. And it was shortly after that coming up to Sowing, and I got a telephone call, and it was a lady called Joanne Good from the BBC, and she said that she was doing a programme. I mainly remember her from her radio show, but I think it was the television programme that she was doing on Halloween and various things that people do, and, you know, would I go on and talk about witchcraft and what I did and this sort of thing. And she said, because you'll never believe it, there's been reports of a group of Satanists in North London graveyard doing rituals. And I had to laugh, because I thought, I happen to know exactly who that is, and that it wasn't a Satanist, and it wasn't doing anything other than walking on a hot summer evening in the only place that had a bit of grass that we could find. But eventually I decided not to do the programme, because I would rather do, for us, Halloween, or Samhain as it's known, is one of our most important festivals. It's our year end and year beginning, as it were. And so I thought that I wanted to do that rather than go and talk about it on TV. But I do remember very clearly on this telephone conversation when I said, if I do it, will you try and do some sort of sensational thing and, you know, make me out to look... And I remember her saying, good God, Jan, no, this is the BBC, not Channel 4. And bearing in mind how the BBC's gone nowadays, where they, in my opinion, do sometimes try and sensationalise people and things. That is my timer, so I'm going to call it an end for today. But I've got several more pages of notes, so I'll leave it with the call from the BBC, and we'll take it up from there next time. But I hope that you've found it interesting and enjoyed my bit of story of my pagan life, as it were. And look out for part 3, which will be recorded as soon as I've done the hoovering, if there's enough light. Anyway, do take care. Lots of love. Bye.